When my husband died, I discovered he had another family I never knew about, and I'm still shaking from what I found out. When I opened that manila envelope 3 days after my husband's funeral, I thought I was just sorting through his insurance papers. What I found inside made my knees buckle, and my entire world crumble in an instant. 28 years of marriage. And I discovered that David had been living a double life that would make your head spin. The photograph that slipped out first showed a woman I'd never seen before, smiling radiantly while holding hands with my supposedly devoted husband. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the birth certificate underneath it, dated just 5 years ago, with David's name listed as the father. My hands started shaking so violently I could barely hold the papers. There were bank statements showing monthly transfers of $2,000 to someone named Rebecca Martinez for the past 8 years. Medical records for a little boy named Tyler Martinez Johnson, listing David as the emergency contact. School enrollment forms, birthday party invitations, even a Father's Day card written in crayon that said, "I love you, Daddy David," in a child's handwriting. How could the man who complained about every penny I spent on groceries have been secretly supporting an entire family? I sank into David's leather chair, the same one where he used to sit every evening reading his newspaper, looking like the picture of domestic contentment. All those late nights at the office, all those weekend business trips, all those times he said he was helping his brother with construction projects. Everything had been a lie. The man I trusted with my entire life had been playing house with another woman while I sat home alone, wondering why he seemed so distant lately. Rebecca wasn't just some affair. She was his second wife in everything but legal papers. The evidence kept piling up like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Lease agreements for an apartment across town where apparently David kept his other family. Credit card statements showing purchases at toy stores and children's clothing shops that never made it to our house. Even a joint savings account I knew nothing about, with over $40,000 that should have been part of our retirement fund. My husband hadn't just betrayed me. He had systematically stolen from our future to build a secret life that excluded me completely. Can you imagine discovering that your entire marriage was built on lies this massive? The man who kissed me goodbye every morning had been kissing another woman goodnight. But what I was about to discover next would make this betrayal look like nothing compared to the real truth. The phone number on one of the bank statements was staring at me like a challenge I couldn't ignore. My rational mind screamed not to call, but my heart was pounding so hard I could barely think straight. What kind of woman knowingly destroys a marriage? What kind of person could look at themselves in the mirror every day, knowing they were the other woman? I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. The voice that answered was soft, sweet, and completely unsuspecting of the bomb I was about to drop. "Hello, is this Rebecca Martinez?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my entire world was spinning out of control. "Yes, this is Rebecca." "Who's calling?" she replied, with the kind of warmth that made my stomach turn. Here I was, about to destroy this woman's life the same way mine had just been obliterated. "This is Sarah Johnson, David's wife." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. When she finally spoke again, her voice had changed completely, becoming small and fragile like a child caught stealing cookies. "Oh my God," she whispered, and I could hear her starting to cry. "He told me you had died 3 years ago. He said you had cancer and, oh my God, what have I done?" The pain in her voice was so genuine it caught me completely off guard. This wasn't the cold, calculating homewrecker I had imagined. This was another victim of David's elaborate web of lies. She had been living in the same fantasy I had been, thinking she had found her happily ever after with a devoted man who worshipped the ground she walked on. "Rebecca, we need to meet," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded when everything inside me was screaming. "There are things we both need to know about the man we thought we loved." She agreed immediately, her sobs making it clear that her world had just shattered into as many pieces as mine. We arranged to meet at Miller's Diner on 5th Street the next morning. As I hung up the phone, I realized that discovering David's betrayal was just the beginning of this nightmare. Now, I had to face the woman who had unknowingly helped destroy my marriage, and somehow we had to piece together the truth about a man who had been lying to both of us for years. But what she was going to tell me about David would reveal a level of deception that would make everything I had discovered so far look like child's play. Walking into Miller's Diner the next morning felt like stepping into a surreal nightmare where nothing made sense anymore. I spotted Rebecca immediately. She looked exactly like the woman in the photographs, except her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with long dark hair and the kind of natural beauty that made my 46-year-old insecurities flare up instantly. But when our eyes met across the restaurant, there was no animosity. Just two broken women trying to understand how their lives had become such a mess. "Sarah?" she asked tentatively as I approached her booth, and I nodded, sliding into the seat across from her. Up close, I could see she had been crying for hours. Her hands were shaking as she wrapped them around her coffee cup, and she kept glancing toward the door as if David might walk in at any moment. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered. "For 8 years, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. David was so attentive, so loving, so devoted to me and Tyler. He never missed a soccer game or a school play. How could someone fake that level of caring?" The waitress came over and I ordered coffee, my stomach too twisted in knots to even think about food. Rebecca reached into her purse and pulled out a photo album that made my heart stop. Page after page of David living a completely different life. David teaching a little boy to ride a bike. David at Christmas morning opening presents. David in a hospital room holding a newborn baby. These weren't stolen moments or secret meetings. This was a full family life, complete with traditions and memories and love that looked absolutely genuine. "He proposed to me 2 years ago," Rebecca said, showing me a ring on her finger that was more expensive than my own wedding band. "We had a small ceremony with just my family. He said his family had disowned him and that we were all he needed. The pieces were starting to fit together in the most horrifying way possible. David hadn't just been having an affair. He had been living 2 completely separate lives with such skill that both families believed they were his whole world. He had compartmentalized his deception so perfectly that neither of us had suspected anything. But as Rebecca continued sharing details about their life together, I began to realize there were still pieces missing from this puzzle, and what she was about to reveal would show me that David's capacity for lies went deeper than either of us could have imagined. "Sarah, there's something else," Rebecca said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "David didn't just tell me you were dead. He told me you had killed yourself because you found out about an affair he was having." My coffee cup slipped from my hands and crashed to the floor, sending hot liquid splashing everywhere. The waitress rushed over with towels, but I barely noticed. David had told his other family that I was not only dead, but that I had taken my own life because of his infidelity. The cruelty of that lie cut deeper than anything else he had done. "He used your supposed death as a way to explain why he was so damaged and why he needed my love to heal," Rebecca continued, tears streaming down her face. "He would get emotional talking about how guilty he felt about your suicide, how he blamed himself for driving you to it. I spent years trying to help him work through that trauma, never knowing it was all completely made up. The manipulation was so calculated, so twisted, that it took my breath away. David had turned my existence into a tool to gain sympathy and deeper emotional connection with another woman. If you're feeling as shocked as I am right now, leave a like on this video because this story gets even more unbelievable. But before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something in the comments. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was living a double life? Because what Rebecca told me next made me realize we still didn't know the full truth about David. She pulled out her phone and showed me text messages between David and someone named Marcus. The messages were discussing keeping the stories straight and making sure the timelines don't overlap. My husband hadn't been working alone in this deception. He had help, and that help came from someone I knew very well. Someone who had been coming to our house for family dinners, someone who had comforted me at David's funeral, someone who had looked me in the eye and lied without blinking. "Rebecca, who is Marcus?" Her response confirmed my worst fears and opened up a whole new level of betrayal that I never saw coming. But before I reveal Rebecca's answer, tell me in the comments, what do you think of Rebecca? Do you think she really knew nothing, or do you think she was faking it? "Marcus is David's best friend from work," Rebecca replied, scrolling through more messages. David always said Marcus was like a brother to him, that he was the only person who knew about our relationship and supported us. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. Marcus Peterson had been David's best man at our wedding 28 years ago. He was Tyler's godfather, for crying out loud. He had been at our house just last week for David's wake, holding my hand and telling me how sorry he was for my loss, how David had loved me so much. The text messages Rebecca showed me painted a picture of calculated deception that made my stomach turn. Messages like, "Sarah's getting suspicious about the overtime, need to adjust the schedule," and "Rebecca's asking about meeting your family." What's the story again? Marcus hadn't just known about David's double life. He had been actively helping orchestrate it. Every alibi, every cover story, every lie that kept David's 2 worlds from colliding had been carefully planned between these 2 men. There are dozens of these messages going back years. Rebecca said, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her phone. Marcus would give David advice on how to handle situations with both families. He even helped coordinate schedules so David would never accidentally double book himself. They treated our lives like some kind of game they were playing. The betrayal from David was devastating enough, but knowing that Marcus had looked me in the eye countless times while actively helping to deceive me felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I thought about all the times Marcus had asked how David and I were doing, all the concerned looks when I mentioned David working late again, all the reassurances that David was just going through a stressful time at work. Every conversation had been a performance, and I had been too trusting to see through it. But as painful as these revelations were, they were nothing compared to what Rebecca discovered when she decided to confront Marcus directly. "I called him yesterday after I got off the phone with you," she said, her voice getting stronger with anger. "And what he told me about David's plans for the future will make your blood run cold." The conversation Rebecca had with Marcus revealed a plan so cold and calculated that it still gives me chills thinking about it. According to Marcus, David had been planning to fake his own death within the next 2 years. He had been slowly moving money into hidden accounts, taking out life insurance policies that Rebecca knew nothing about, and creating an exit strategy that would allow him to disappear completely and start fresh somewhere else with a new identity. Both of his families were meant to believe he had died, collect insurance money, and grieve for a man who would be living on a beach in Mexico with a new name. Marcus said David was getting tired of juggling 2 lives, Rebecca told me, her voice filled with disgust. He wanted to disappear and leave both of us behind to pick up the pieces. The heart attack just happened before he could execute his plan. I sat there staring at this woman, realizing that David's sudden death might have actually saved both of us from an even worse betrayal. Instead of mourning a loving husband, we would have spent years wondering why he vanished, probably blaming ourselves for not being enough to make him stay. Can you imagine planning to destroy 2 families just so you can start over with a clean slate? Tell me in the comments if you've ever known someone capable of that level of selfishness, because I'm still struggling to believe the man I loved could be so cruel. The David I thought I knew would never hurt a fly. But the real David had been planning the ultimate disappearing act that would have left both his families devastated and financially ruined. But Marcus told Rebecca something else that made me realize David's deception went even deeper than we thought. There were other women. Not just Rebecca and me. There had been others over the years. Short-term relationships that David had used for money, emotional support, or just for the thrill of the chase. Marcus had helped cover for those too, creating alibis and excuses while David played his sick games with innocent women's hearts. The man I had buried 3 days ago wasn't the devoted husband I thought I had lost. He was a master manipulator who had spent decades perfecting the art of deception, and Rebecca and I were just his longest-running victims. "There's something else Marcus told me," Rebecca said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small notebook. David kept records, names, dates, amounts of money, personal details about every woman he was involved with. Marcus said he called it his project book. She opened the notebook, and I saw pages of handwriting in David's familiar script, but the content was like reading about a stranger. Lists of women's names with notes like, "Good for 500, use sick mother story," and "emotional type, responds to romantic gestures, max potential 3,000. My name was on the first page, dated 28 years ago, with notes about my personality, my weaknesses, my family's financial situation, even details about my insecurities that David had learned during our early dating period. I wasn't his wife. I was his first long-term con, a mark he had studied and manipulated from day one. The romantic gestures, the thoughtful gifts, the way he always seemed to know exactly what to say to make me feel better. It had all been calculated manipulation, based on psychological notes he kept like a predator studying his prey. Rebecca's page was dated 8 years ago, with similar notes about her vulnerability as a single mother, her desperate need for stability, her family's financial struggles that made her easy to impress with expensive gifts. He wrote that I was perfect long-term investment because I wouldn't ask too many questions as long as he provided financial security, she said, tears streaming down her face. I thought he loved me and Tyler, but we were just another project to him. The notebook contained at least 15 other women's names, some dating back to when David and I were newlyweds. While I was home planning our future and dreaming about the children we would have together, he was out there studying other women like a scientist collecting research data. Every fight we had, every moment of happiness we shared, every intimate detail I had confided in him, it had all been recorded and analyzed for his benefit. But the most chilling part wasn't the systematic way he had cataloged his victims. It was the final entry in the notebook, dated just 2 weeks before his death, that revealed his ultimate plan for both Rebecca and me. The last entry in David's notebook was titled Final Phase and laid out a timeline that made my hands shake as I read it. According to his notes, he had been planning to slowly poison both Rebecca and me with small doses of antifreeze mixed into our food and drinks. The plan was to make it look like we had both developed mysterious illnesses that would eventually kill us, leaving him free to collect life insurance money from both households before disappearing to start his new life. He had already started, Rebecca whispered, showing me medical records on her phone. I've been getting sicker and sicker over the past few months. Fatigue, nausea, kidney problems that doctors couldn't explain. I thought it was stress from Tyler starting school and David working so much overtime. I felt the room spinning as I remembered my own recent health issues. The same unexplained fatigue, the same digestive problems, the same kidney function tests that had been coming back abnormal for the past 3 months. Before I reveal what we discovered next, let me ask you in the comments, have you ever had someone in your life who made you feel sick in ways you couldn't explain? Because what Rebecca and I figured out next probably saved both our lives. We compared our symptoms, our recent medical visits, even the foods and drinks David had been preparing for us, and the pattern was undeniable. The loving husband who brought me coffee every morning and the devoted partner who cooked Rebecca's favorite meals had been slowly killing both of us. The notebook contained research about antifreeze poisoning, how to disguise the taste, how to administer doses that would cause gradual organ failure without immediate suspicion. David had been practicing murder while kissing us goodnight and telling us he loved us. The man who held my hand during my medical appointments had been the one causing my illness, probably enjoying watching me suffer while playing the concerned husband. But the most terrifying discovery was still to come, because Marcus had one final piece of information that revealed just how close David had come to completing his plan. Marcus told Rebecca that David had already purchased the life insurance policies on both of us, policies worth $500,000 each that we knew nothing about. He had been forging our signatures for months, using information from our medical files to answer health questions, and paying the premiums with money stolen from our joint accounts. In David's twisted mind, Rebecca and I were already dead. He was just waiting for the poison to finish the job so he could collect the money and disappear. The scariest part is how close he came to succeeding, Rebecca said, showing me copies of the insurance documents Marcus had given her. According to his timeline, we both should have been dead within the next 6 weeks. He had already booked a flight to Mexico under a fake name for 2 months from now. I stared at those papers, realizing that David's heart attack had literally saved our lives. If he had lived another month or two, both Rebecca and I would be in the ground right now, while he sipped cocktails on a beach somewhere. The man I had loved and trusted with my entire life had been a serial killer in training, and Rebecca and I were supposed to be his masterpiece. 2 perfect murders that would set him up financially for life. Every kiss goodbye in the morning, every I love you before bed, every concerned look when I complained about feeling sick had been the performance of a psychopath who was slowly murdering the women who loved him most. We sat in that diner for 4 hours, comparing notes, sharing photos, and piecing together the full scope of David's deception. By the time we left, we had decided that we couldn't let his death be the end of this story. Too many people had been hurt, too many women had been victimized, and Marcus was still out there helping other predators destroy innocent lives. The police needed to know what David had been planning, and Marcus needed to face consequences for his role in years of systematic abuse. But what happened when we walked into the police station would reveal one final twist that neither of us saw coming. But before I reveal what happened at the police station, please like this video and tell me in the comments, do you think Rebecca and I were right to go to the police, or should we have tried to resolve this ourselves? Detective Williams listened to our story with the kind of professional calm that told me he had heard similar tales before, but even he seemed shocked by the scope of David's deception. We handed over the notebook, the insurance documents, the bank records, and Rebecca's medical files showing the gradual poisoning. Ladies, what you're describing is one of the most elaborate cases of domestic fraud and attempted murder I've seen in 20 years, he said, making notes as we talked. But when Detective Williams ran David's name through the national database, his expression changed completely. Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Martinez, I need to ask you both to sit down, he said in a voice that made my stomach drop. David Johnson isn't who either of you think he was. His real name was David Lawrence Mitchell, and he's been wanted by the FBI for the past 15 years in connection with at least 6 suspicious deaths of women he was romantically involved with. The room started spinning as Detective Williams showed us David's real criminal history. 3 wives in different states who had died of mysterious illnesses, 2 girlfriends who had suffered fatal accidents, and 1 fiancé who had disappeared completely. All of them had life insurance policies that David had collected on before vanishing to a new city with a new identity. Rebecca and I weren't his first victims. We were just the latest in a string of women he had systematically murdered for money. The pattern is always the same, Detective Williams explained. He establishes multiple relationships in the same city, slowly poisons his victims while collecting insurance money, then fakes his own death or disappears to start over somewhere else. You two are incredibly lucky that his heart attack happened when it did. I thought about all the women whose names were in that notebook. Women who probably had no idea they had escaped death by pure chance when David moved on to other targets. Marcus had been more than just a friend helping with alibis. He had been an active participant in multiple murders, probably taking a cut of the insurance money in exchange for his help. But what Detective Williams told us next would reveal that David's criminal network was much larger than we had imagined. The FBI had been tracking David for over a decade, but every time they got close, he would disappear and resurface in a new city with a new identity and new victims. Marcus Peterson wasn't just David's accomplice. He was part of an organized group that helped men like David create false identities, establish credit histories, and find vulnerable women to target. They called themselves lifestyle consultants, but they were really professional predators who specialized in long-term cons that ended in murder. We've been trying to infiltrate this network for years, Detective Williams explained. Your husband's death and the evidence you've brought us might be the break we need to take down the entire operation. The notebook contained contact information for other members of the group, locations of safe houses where they helped men disappear, and even a fee schedule for different services like document forgery and victim selection assistance. Rebecca and I sat there realizing that we had stumbled into something much bigger than one man's betrayal. We had uncovered a criminal enterprise that had been destroying families and murdering women for profit across multiple states. Every woman's name in that notebook represented someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's mother who had fallen victim to these monsters. And there were probably dozens of other notebooks belonging to other members of this group. The FBI wanted us to help them by working with Marcus, wearing recording devices to get him to confess to his role in David's crimes. It would be dangerous, but it might be the only way to get justice for all the women who had died and prevent future victims. These men are experts at manipulation and violence, Detective Williams warned us. If you decide to help, you'll be putting yourselves at significant risk. But there was one more revelation coming that would make the decision even more complicated. David's criminal network had been watching both of us since his death, and we were already in more danger than we realized. Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Martinez, I need to be completely honest with you, Detective Williams said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. We've had surveillance on both of your homes since yesterday. Members of David's network have been watching you, probably trying to figure out how much you know and whether you pose a threat to their operation. My blood ran cold as I thought about the strange cars I had noticed in my neighborhood, the feeling of being watched when I walked to my mailbox, the phone calls with no one on the other end. The FBI had intercepted communications between Marcus and other network members discussing the Sarah problem and the Rebecca situation. They saw us as loose ends that needed to be tied up, especially since we had access to David's notebook and financial records that could expose their entire operation. They've killed witnesses before, Detective Williams continued. We can offer you protection, but your safest option might be to help us get the evidence we need to arrest them all. Rebecca grabbed my hand across the table and I could feel her trembling. We had gone from grieving women trying to understand our husband's betrayal to key witnesses in a federal investigation of serial killers. The men who had helped David plan to murder us were now planning to finish the job he had started. Every day we delayed gave them more time to eliminate the evidence and the witnesses who could bring them to justice. What exactly would we need to do? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when everything inside me was screaming. Detective Williams explained that they wanted us to arrange separate meetings with Marcus, using the excuse that we needed help understanding David's financial affairs. We would wear recording devices and try to get him to admit his role in helping David deceive and poison us. The FBI believed Marcus would be overconfident since he thought we were just grieving women who didn't understand the full scope of what had been happening. But if he became suspicious or felt threatened, things could turn violent very quickly. And what they told us next about Marcus's history made it clear that this man was every bit as dangerous as David had been. Marcus Peterson's real name was Marcus Edward Reeves, and his criminal history made David look like an amateur. He had been suspected in the deaths of at least 12 women over the past 20 years, always managing to avoid prosecution by maintaining plausible deniability about his relationships with the actual killers. He specialized in recruiting and training men like David, teaching them how to create false identities, how to select vulnerable victims, and how to murder without leaving evidence. Marcus is what we call a master manipulator, Detective Williams explained. He never gets his hands dirty directly, but he orchestrates everything from behind the scenes. The FBI believes he's been running this network for over 2 decades, and David was just one of his most successful students. I thought about all the times Marcus had been in my home, eating dinner at my table, playing with the neighborhood children, charming everyone with his friendly smile and helpful attitude. He was a predator hiding in plain sight, using his likable personality to scout for victims and gather intelligence. The recording equipment was smaller than I expected, just a tiny device that clipped to my bra and a backup recorder hidden in my purse. Rebecca and I would meet with Marcus separately, each trying to get him to reveal different aspects of his involvement with David's crimes. The FBI would be monitoring everything in real time, ready to intervene if things went wrong, but there would still be several minutes where we would be alone with a man who had helped plan our murders. Remember, Marcus doesn't know that you know about the poisoning or the insurance policies, Detective Williams coached us. As far as he's concerned, you're just confused widows trying to understand your husband's financial affairs. Let him think he's smarter than you, and he'll probably say more than he should. The plan was risky, but it was our best chance to get the evidence needed to arrest not just Marcus, but the entire network of killers he had been training and supporting. That night, I went home to a house that no longer felt safe, knowing that trained killers were watching my every move. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced since finding that first photograph, a sense of purpose and the possibility of getting justice for David's victims. The meeting with Marcus was set for the next afternoon at his office downtown. I spent the morning going over my story with the FBI agents, practicing how to sound confused and helpless while secretly recording everything he said. Remember, you're a grieving widow who doesn't understand finances, Agent Rodriguez coached me. Let him explain things to you like you're a child and ask innocent questions that might make him reveal more than he intended. When I walked into Marcus's office at 2 o'clock, he greeted me with the same warm smile he had given me at David's funeral. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" he asked, guiding me to a chair across from his desk. "I know this must be such a difficult time for you trying to figure out all of David's business affairs." The concern in his voice sounded so genuine that if I didn't know better, I would have believed he actually cared about my well-being. "That's exactly why I'm here, Marcus," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "I found some bank statements and insurance papers that I don't understand. David always handled all the financial stuff, and now I'm completely lost." Marcus leaned forward with that helpful expression I had seen so many times before, not knowing that every word he said was being recorded by the FBI agents listening from the van parked outside. "Of course, Sarah. David would want me to help take care of you," he said, his voice filled with fake sympathy. "Why don't you show me what you found, and I'll explain everything." I pulled out copies of some of the bank statements Rebecca and I had discovered, the ones showing the transfers to David's secret accounts. Marcus glanced at them quickly, and I saw something flicker in his eyes before he composed himself again. What he told me next would give the FBI everything they needed to arrest him, but it would also reveal that the danger to Rebecca and me was far from over. "Oh, these accounts," Marcus said, his voice becoming more casual as he looked at the bank statements. "David and I set those up for a little side business we were running. Nothing for you to worry about, Sarah. Just some investment opportunities that require discretion." His explanation was smooth and practiced, but the FBI had coached me to ask follow-up questions that would make him reveal more details about their business. "What kind of investments?" I asked, trying to sound naive and trusting. David never mentioned any side business to me. Marcus smiled and leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the opportunity to show off his intelligence to what he thought was a confused widow. "We helped men in difficult marriage situations create financial independence," he explained. "Sometimes a man needs to protect his assets before a divorce, you know? We provided consulting services for that kind of planning." The recording device felt like it was burning against my chest as Marcus continued describing their consulting business in terms that made it sound almost legitimate. But when I asked about the insurance policies, his demeanor changed slightly. "Insurance policies? David didn't mention taking out any new policies recently." He was lying, and we both knew it, but he was still trying to maintain his cover story. "I found paperwork for life insurance policies on me that I never signed," I said, watching his face carefully. "The signatures look like mine, but I don't remember ever filling out those applications." For just a moment, Marcus's friendly mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. He was realizing that I knew more than I was supposed to, and that made me extremely dangerous to him. "Sarah, maybe you should let me handle all of this paperwork for you," he said, reaching for the documents with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Grief can be very confusing, and you might be misremembering things. Why don't you give me everything you found, and I'll sort it all out for you? But I knew that if I handed over those papers, I might not make it out of his office alive. Actually, Marcus, I should probably talk to a lawyer first, I said, pulling the papers back toward me. David always said I should never sign anything without legal advice. His friendly expression faltered for just a moment, but it was long enough for me to see the predator underneath the helpful neighbor act. He was calculating his options, trying to decide if I was just a confused widow or a real threat to his operation. Of course, Sarah, that's very smart, he said, but his voice had changed. Although, lawyers can be expensive, and they don't always understand complex financial arrangements like the ones David was involved in. Maybe we should schedule another meeting after you've had time to think about everything. He was trying to end our conversation and get me out of his office before I could ask any more dangerous questions. I stood up to leave, clutching the papers against my chest, when Marcus said something that made my blood freeze. Sarah, you should be very careful about who you talk to about David's business affairs. Some people might not understand the complexity of what he was doing, and misunderstandings can be very dangerous for everyone involved. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat, delivered with the same friendly smile he had been wearing all afternoon. As I walked to my car, I could feel Marcus watching me from his office window. The FBI agents in the surveillance van confirmed that they had recorded everything, including his veiled threat at the end. That's enough to bring him in for questioning, Agent Rodriguez told me through my earpiece. But Sarah, you need to be extremely careful now. Marcus knows that you're suspicious, and that makes you a target. The trap had worked perfectly, but now I was in more danger than ever. Marcus would report back to his network that the grieving widows were asking too many questions, and they would need to be eliminated before they could expose the entire operation. But what happened that evening would prove that we had underestimated just how quickly these killers could move when they felt threatened. That night, I was sitting in my living room under FBI protection when Detective Williams called with urgent news. Sarah, we just arrested Marcus, but when we searched his office, we found evidence that contracts have already been put out on both you and Rebecca. The network is moving fast to eliminate witnesses, and we need to get you both into protective custody immediately. My hands started shaking as I realized that David's criminal associates were planning to finish what he had started. How much time do we have? I asked, watching the FBI agent stationed outside my house through the window. Not much, Detective Williams replied. We intercepted communications indicating that hitmen are already en route to your city. These aren't amateurs, Sarah. They're professional killers who specialize in making murders look like accidents or natural deaths. The irony wasn't lost on me that after surviving David's slow poisoning, I was now facing immediate danger from the same network that had trained him to be a killer. Rebecca and I were moved to a safe house that night, where we waited for news about the FBI's raids on other network locations across the country. The investigation we had started by comparing our stories in a diner had uncovered a criminal organization responsible for dozens of murders spanning multiple decades. 3 months later, the trials began. Marcus and 6 other network members were convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. The evidence Rebecca and I had provided led to the discovery of more victims, more false identities, and more families destroyed by these predators. We testified together, 2 women who had unknowingly married the same sociopathic killer and lived to tell about it. Today, Rebecca and I have become close friends bonded by our shared survival of something that should have killed us. Her son, Tyler, who never knew David was planning to murder his mother, is thriving in school and has no idea how close he came to being orphaned by a man he called Daddy. We both still go to therapy to process the trauma of discovering that our entire relationships were elaborate murder plots, but we're alive and we're stronger than we ever thought possible. If this story has affected you the way it affected me when I lived through it, please share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Too many women ignore red flags or make excuses for partners whose behavior doesn't add up. Trust your instincts, ask questions when things don't make sense, and remember that love should never make you feel sick, confused, or afraid. Leave a comment below telling me about a time you trusted your gut feeling about someone, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we should fear the most, but surviving their betrayal can make us stronger than we ever imagined possible.